Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. In today's video, I'm going to be going over some of the weird and interesting Bigfoot-like creatures that were said to roam the areas of the Nakani Valley up in the Yukon, which is in northern Canada for those of you who aren't, from Canada. But before we get into that, the Bigfoot Quest for the Wildman documentary series is still on GoFundMe. This past week we've had a lot of donations to that project and we're almost halfway. So my thinking is that by the time the weather gets, significantly better, we'll be fully funded and we'll be ready to really push forward and start actually shooting that project. That means getting out into the bush for like 2 or 3 weeks and actually staying out there for a prolonged period of time, which is what we need. I mean, there's not a lot of documentaries where you see people actually out there for that amount of time. It's always, they're out there for a couple days and this and that. So we want to actually be out there for that amount of time, and we want to see what kind of evidence we can find, and we want to see if we can find the cave. So that's the big mission. That's the number one goal for the documentary series, is to see if these creatures are in fact living out there and hiding out in this cave during the winter. Like I said, the GoFundMe page link is down below. We've had people donate through PayPal, sign up on Patreon, and also we've had some people buying merchandise from the Spreadshirt t-shirt shop, which is really cool. But yeah, the Nakani Valley. I've talked about it before on the channel. You guys might know it as the Headless Valley due to the amount of stories that come from the area where people have turned up on the shore of the Nakani River missing their heads. And there's lots of theories as to what has caused these people to lose their heads. The number one theory being Bigfoot-like creatures. Some other people suspect it could be like, an ancient primitive people who, do cannibalism and eat people and rip off their heads and it gets really weird. But I've showed you guys this book before by Emerson Peters. He's from British Columbia here in Canada. Legends of the Nakani Valley. It's a really good book. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you guys some passages from the book about some of these Bigfoot-like creatures. There's a multitude of creatures from that area. Some of them are very different than what you'd expect, a Sasquatch to be. There's some of them that wear very primitive makeshift kind of clothing. There's some of them that are definitely more of like a spiritual being or creature. And then there's, your typical Bigfoot-like creature, but we're gonna dig into that a little deeper here. Recommend, if you like reading and you like a good mystery book, picking up a copy of this on Amazon. I have a link down below in the description. Hammerson's also working on some other stuff right now. I think he's writing a book on the Curse of Oak Island. And that's another really interesting Canadian mystery. I think there's a show on History Channel about it. But yeah, stay tuned and I hope you guys enjoy this video. From the Yowie of Australia to the Yeren of China to the Yeti of the Himalayas, huge hairy wildmen feature in folklore around the world, and Canada is no exception. Undoubtedly, the Great White North's most famous wildman is the Sasquatch, the shy, reclusive giant said to roam the rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, often referred to as Bigfoot. Less well known are the Sasquatch's coastal counterparts, the emaciated, long-haired Bakwas, or Wild Man of the Woods, said to haunt the rivers and streams of Vancouver Island and the Queen Charlotte Sound, and the huge, dim-witted Zunaqua, an old, black-skinned, red-lipped ogress purported to snatch up mischievous children and carry them off in a basket to her forest lair. More obscure wild men have been reported in other parts of the country, from the Rocky Mountains of western Alberta to the Rocky Highlands of Labrador. Perhaps most mysterious of all, however, are the various humanoids said to inhabit the taiga, tundra, and alpine areas of the Canadian North. Among the most prominent of these are the Nakani. Dene tribes from all over the north, from the eastern shores of the Mackenzie River to the forests of Alaska, spoke of mysterious wild men who harassed them at night, often lurking in the shadows just beyond the light of the campfire. The Dene were terrified of these elusive creatures, who were as vividly real to them as the wolf and the raven, and went to great lengths to avoid crossing paths with them. Most 19th and 20th century frontiersmen who wrote about the Nakani in their books and journals were under the impression that the Dene regarded them as hairy, cannibalistic giants, vaguely human in appearance, with red eyes and long, muscular arms. They described the Nakani as terrible wild men, with red eyes and of enormous height, completely covered with long hair. Their tremendous size was attested to by the 3-foot-long human-like footprints that they left in their wake, as well as their alleged ability to tear entire birch trees from the earth with their bare hands, roots and all. Many frontiersmen wrote about the incredible size of the creature's footprints, which they left behind in the snow and muskeg. Their tracks were purportedly man-like in appearance, yet much longer and narrower. In some accounts, their big toe stood out from the remaining 4. Although their footprints never bore any nail marks, some said that the Nakani's fingers were tipped with long, nail-like claws. By the mid-20th century, the image of the Nakani as an enormous hairy monster was making its way into books and popular magazines, often in dramatic fashion. For example, an article entitled "Cursed Treasure of Dead Man's Valley," published in the June 1968 issue of the magazine, maintained that the Nakani were hairy demons who stand as high as a Kodiak bear, are as swift as a bird in flight, and kill all things they can reach by cutting off their heads. Their skin is so tough that a bullet will not penetrate it, and cutting it with a knife is more difficult than cutting stone. The Kaska, Slavi, and Mountain Indians of Mackenzie Country long maintained that the Nahanni Valley was the domain of the Nakani, and these fearsome monsters resided within its foreboding caves and canyons. The Nakani were by no means confined to these remote mountain hideaways. Many of these monsters tirelessly traversed the subarctic forests in search of prey, often traveling extraordinarily long distances without stopping for food or rest, usually alone. The Nakani have been blamed for the unusual number of mysterious deaths and disappearances that have plagued the Nahanni country since the days of Willie and Frank McLeod. Legend has it that these monsters did their grisly work at night, prowling about the river valley in the dark and quietly dispatching any campers they happened to encounter, perhaps tearing, twisting, or hacking their victims' heads from their shoulders. Outside the Mackenzie Mountains, the Nakani hunted traveling Indians, stalking them from concealment in the brush. Oftentimes, a Nakani's intended victims only became aware of its presence when one of their number, perhaps a scout on reconnaissance duty, stumbled upon its strange tracks in the forest, or caught a glimpse of its dark figure out of the corner of his eye, darting noiselessly into the bush. In other instances, the uncanny feeling of being watched might serve as sufficient proof that a Nakani was somewhere nearby. When a Nakani targeted a particular camp, it took up residence in the trees just beyond the light of the campfire. Sometimes it taunted its intended victims by throwing rocks or sticks at them. It also, on occasion, emitted strange whistling sounds, or noises resembling human laughter. Often it would slip into camp in the middle of the night and steal food, typically fish, either from drying racks or smokehouses, or destroy fish nets and other equipment. Legend has it that the purpose of the Nakani visits were twofold. In primary objective, it was stealing women. Girls who strayed too far from the camp, especially at dawn or dusk, were in serious danger of being abducted and dragged away into the woods, never to be seen again. The other motivation that drew these monsters to Dene camps was sustenance. If afforded the opportunity, Nakani would snatch children and lone hunters and carry them off into the woods, where it would devour them. On rare occasions, intended victims, most often young women, narrowly escaped the Nakani's clutches and returned to tell the tale. Those who survived the encounters often described a powerful, nauseating odor, which preceded the attack. Others reported being beset by an overwhelming, almost petrifying sense of dread, as if the Nakani had exercised some sort of hypnotic power over them. The Inuit of the far north from Alaska to the Arctic archipelago to Greenland have legends about a race of primitive giants at least twice the size of regular men, who once inhabited the lands they occupy today. They call this ancient people Toonijuk. Physically, the Toonijuk were said to be immensely powerful, and could easily carry full-grown bearded seals on their backs. They did not live in igloos like the Inuit, but rather in circular stone pit houses, roofed with whale ribs and animal skins. A simple people, the Toonijuk were said to practice a number of revolting customs. They did not usually cook their meat, and preferred to eat it rotten. The Toonijuk women would sometimes sit with raw meat tucked between their thighs and belly, in the hope that their body heat would hasten the decomposition process. As they did not know how to cure animal skins, bits of rotten meat and rancid fat dangled from the sides of their robes. Sometimes, the Toonijuk would sew their young warriors into maggot-infested seal skins, believing that this would somehow enhance their skills as warriors. Although the Toonijuk are said to have fought bitterly with one another, they rarely showed aggression towards the Inuit. Eventually, the Inuit began to hunt down the Toonijuk, and in time greatly reduced their number. The giants who survived these predations fled to the mountains of the interior, where some say their descendants still linger to this very day. An Algonquian legend which made its way to the North Country from the Great Lakes region by the way of the Cree, the story of the Wendigo is another northern tale containing Wildman elements. According to some interpretations of the legend, the Wendigo is a ravenous, man-eating giant which roams the northern forests in search of human flesh. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones, with its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into the sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody, unclean and suffering from suppurations of the flesh. The Wendigo gave off a strange, eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. Another version of the Wendigo legend has it that this entity is not a physical creature, but rather a malevolent spirit associated with the north, the cold, and starvation. During the winter months, it roams throughout the wilderness in search of human hosts. Indians who engaged in cannibalism made themselves especially vulnerable to Wendigo possession. When a person became possessed by a Wendigo, they gradually developed an insatiable appetite for human flesh, which drove them to butcher and eat their fellow tribesmen, even when other food sources were readily available. One famous case of suspected Wendigo possession occurred in central Alberta in 1878. That winter, a Plains Cree trapper named Swiftrunner slaughtered, cooked, and devoured his wife and 6 children. When the Northwest Mounted Police arrested him for this crime, he claimed that he was possessed by the Wendigo and needed to be killed before he caused more damage. The Mounties acquiesced. After trying Swiftrunner and finding him guilty on 7 accounts of first-degree murder, they hanged him at Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta in 1879.